Hi, this is Phoenix, and I wanted to dedicate this video to just kind of a free flow, free association of thought. Um, so the argumentation is going to be a little loose, but I think that's okay. I think my mission will be accomplished, though. Basically, what I want to do is do a quick critique of Western culture. I want to focus specifically on the fear that we are indoctrinated in Western culture. The fear. I mean, I don't really know how to explain that. Just that we definitely there's this. Well, no, I can't say this. So the idea is that if we don't conform, essentially we risk not being able to preserve of the self and preserve ourselves. When we don't conform to what society expects of us, we are essentially putting ourselves at risk and putting ourselves in danger. So Thomas Hobbes is definitely very appropriate to this. He says that if man didn't have government, we would, and this is a paraphrase, but the basic idea is if man didn't have government, man would die. Man's life would be brutish and short. And it's because we're afraid of a violent death. And that's why we conform to society and what society expects out of us. And I don't know if you've been following my writing, following my YouTube blog, my YouTube channel, or my blog, or my books. But whatever you followed, you've probably realized that I definitely don't conform. And I don't conform out of a sense of rebellion. But it's interesting because the more that I realize that I literally cannot conform because of the type of person that I am, and because of the values that I have, the system of ethics that I have, the more that I realize that I actually want to rebel, and that I actively want to rebel. And I think this is interesting. So when you take certain historical figures who definitely faced problems because they didn't conform, such as Christ and Socrates, they're very good examples of people who have people who did not conform, but people who nonetheless well, they made important contributions, but even more, they were people who were willing to test the waters and test the boundaries. And so Socrates did that by being the gadfly of Athens to try to spur them to action. And you could definitely say the same thing about Christ. It's been described that his parables were actually very subversive. And I think that's interesting to keep in mind that his parables were subversive, such as even the parable of the mustard seed. Just real fast, it's subversive because it describes how a mustard seed was able to create a tree in a garden that was very sorry, it's hard to focus with all the noise and distractions, but anyway, so it was subversive because it creates this tree that basically gets in the way of the garden. And it's interesting because that itself can be a metaphor for a kind of disorder that is created from what is otherwise an orderly process, such as growth, such as planting a seed. So anyway, it's interesting to follow the route of the trajectory of the lives of Socrates and Christ, just as two examples. You could even take another figure such as Buddha or Alan Turing, but there are plenty of examples of people who took unconventional routes in life and were essentially punished for them. And I think that's because in the West we have this really big emphasis on conformity, and we always have had that. I know that's a grand sweeping statement, but that seems to be the best conclusion that I can come up with for now. And the fear is indoctrinated in us because we're afraid that we live in a very violent world. This narrative is constantly passed down to us in various ways. And we live in a very violent world, a very scary world, and I think that that's interesting because for somebody like me who realizes that I don't conform, I actually feel more fear knowing that I don't conform than the fear that I fear because I don't conform, which I think is an interesting statement to keep in mind. And so really, this is just meant to be kind of a critique of Western culture and the problems of Western culture. So, you know, if you take the example of Socrates, Socrates did really amazing things, but because he was willing to push the boundaries and test things, he was eventually executed and killed because of his beliefs. And I think that this is the problem with Western society and maybe even society at large. I know that there's been some problems like this in the East. I've heard that corruption in India is very severe. For instance, Maos China, that would be another example. of very, very questionable problems. And so I'm not really trying to propound any kind of explanation or any kind of answer or any kind of solution. But I think that it's important that we keep this in mind, because there should be no reason, I was going to say there should be no reason why we should all have to conform, but that sounds like I'm taking an ethical stance, and that's something that I don't want to do, at least right now. But what I do want to say is that it makes it very hard for people like me, people that seek to push the boundaries, not because they're trying to create conflict and rebel, but because they're trying to understand this world and to gain the truth that is going to have the most impact and the most significance, whether for my life, whether for other people's lives, or anybody's life. And I think that's super important to keep in mind, because it makes you wonder, what does the world do with people like me? Well, if I was going to be blunt, they would label me as, they would literally label me with a mental illness that forever stigmatizes me. That's essentially what society has done. And I know that sounds like a rant, but you have to think about it. There's kind of some truth to it. And I'm not trying to make myself out to be a martyr. In fact, I'm not a martyr. But what I think is really chilling about these notions that I'm thinking about is that sometimes it's very tempting to believe that society wants to make me a martyr because they've already branded me, they've already X'd me, and they've essentially acknowledged that I'm different. And because I'm different, and because I'm aware that I'm different, it makes things really hard. So I think of Du Bois and his lovely concept of double consciousness, and basically his idea that an African American not only thinks of how white people perceive him or how the other perceives him, but how he perceives himself. And so that is the double consciousness. And I realized that that's what I experience as the double consciousness, because I've uncovered this idea that I think very differently, and many times it works against me. And I'm not going to go so far as to say that I fear that I'm going to become another Socrates, or another Alan Turing, that because of my lifestyle or because of my beliefs and values, I'm going to be burnt at the stake, like a witch, which also happened. That's another gruesome aspect of history. But I am going to say that there is this very troubling notion of, what am I supposed to do when I realize that there's something about me that is fundamentally different, and that I don't know how to use that to my advantage, or I don't even know how to use that at all, and how it seems to get me into trouble. And so I think the difficulty is just understanding and uncovering what I can do to achieve the truth that I believe I am here to uncover. And I know that sounds very grandiose, and I don't mean it to sound grandiose, but I honestly can't think of any other reason why I'm here except to uncover some kind of truth, and some kind of important truth. And granted, that is my own self-imposed teleology, but it's the only thing that makes sense to me, and it's the only thing that really makes sense to me. And so what I was going to say is, sure, when I mention people like Alan Turing and Christ, I might be having an observation bias, but I think the reason for that observation bias is because I can relate to those people. I think it is certainly remarkable what they accomplished, and how they were indeed truth seekers, and they never rested. And they didn't rest until their death. And even then, when it comes to Buddha, you could wonder if he rested, if he became a bodhisattva and actually stuck around to help other people, or if he went on to nirvana. And anyway, the point being that it's hard to know kind of what we do with this notion of fear that we are indoctrinated in. And so even right now, as an example, there's loud music behind me, and even that, my intuitive feeling, and I'm not saying this is correct, but my intuitive feeling is that that music is there as a kind of reminder of the conformity that we're supposed to stick with. So the circumstances around us get to rebel, but we ourselves do not get to rebel. And I think that that's the fear that is put into us, because we know that people that rebel are essentially people who become martyrs, and we know that those are the people that essentially get punished by society. And I think that that's what makes it very difficult. Now, of course, I could talk about all of this forever, but I don't want to do that. But I do want to close, and I want to close by saying, if you're a kind of person who knows that you don't conform, who knows that you are a black sheep per se, but knows that you have a gift, or knows that you have gifts, I would definitely encourage you to chase those gifts and chase those dreams, because even in my experience at least, and of course this is part of the process and part of understanding, and maybe you've already understood this or believe this or justified it, but if you are branded as someone who is different, what you should do is you should try to learn how to use that to your advantage, because essentially you are a truth seeker, or at least I want to extrapolate that theme, that you are indeed a truth seeker, and that you can use that truth to progress something. As far as what that is, I don't know, even if that's only your own life. But I'm just saying that because it's very easy to get indoctrinated in this idea of fear, where we think that if we rebel against the loud music, for instance, that's playing in the background, or if we rebel against people that have persecuted us in some way or another, we think that we are essentially setting ourselves up for a violent death. And I think that there's some truth to that, but I think that what we need to do is we need to think about these ideas conceptually and do what we can to chase that truth conceptually and try to look at our lives as cognitive, as reducing to the cognitive level, to consciousness, because if we can, according to Buddhism, if we can have an incredible strength of mind, it's amazing what we can put up with. It's amazing what we can deal with, and that's what can drive us to continue to search for truth. And in my opinion, I don't think anything is more important than the truth. I know that there are some problems with that claim, and this doesn't mean this is definitive, but it's the best conclusion I have for now. But I think that it's fair to say that there's nothing more important than seeking the truth, because the truth will, I believe, it's hard to say exactly what it will do, but I think it's important that we seek it, and I think that it's important for our evolution as people, and for our evolution as society, and for our evolution of us individually. And I think we can learn a lot by trying to seek truth, despite the consequences. And so again, to conclude, I would just say that we should never let the fear that we are indoctrinated in and the narratives that are passed on to us of terrible things that happen to people define our lives, and we should be willing to take chances and to take risks and to believe in what we do. Because again, to go back to my ideas of conviction, we really, really need conviction. We really, really need to believe that our conviction is going to lead us somewhere. And there's problems with that because we know that if we hold on too much to an ideology, it can lead us into trouble. But I'm not taking it that far. I'm just taking it far enough to where we can at least accept that the fact that we are not going to accept the fear that is passed down to us culturally and not semantically, but verbally, through stories and narratives and myths. If we can accept that, then I believe truly that we can do amazing things. And again, I guess this is a little bit more than just a critique of Western culture. It's also kind of a pep talk in a sense, and encouragement, and a speech. But the point is, there's no reason why we should be indoctrinated into the fear that Western culture tries to put into us, because there's nothing to be afraid of. Truth is not anything to fear. Again, this is Phoenix, and thank you.